Hello, everybody, and welcome to In Conversation With, where I am hosting the fabulous Kay Gillard. We are going to be talking about healing story, which is a wonderful subject for both of us because we are both big fans, let's say, of healing story. I'm going to let you know a little bit about Kay and how we came together, how we bonded, and then Kay's going to introduce herself, and we're going to talk all things healing story. And for anyone who is here live with us, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions about healing stories, should that feel good and right to you. And yeah, so healing story with Kay Gillard and Maggie Rose Cunningham. Welcome. So, I feel like a story in itself is starting to be born inside me here. With I was thinking about when I first met you, Kay, and I was a tiny baby witchlet, and it was my first ever event where I went to meet other magical people. I'd done it online before. I mean, online was a thing. It wasn't a huge thing. I'm going to be honest. It wasn't a huge thing.
Was it a chat room?
Yes, it was a very, very basic chat room, let's say, and that was it. And I was like, right, I'm going to go to a live event and I'm going to see what it's like, and it'll be fine. And there was a bit of deep breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in, and it was a room of charming, wonderful people, many of whom I still know to this day.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I was shy, I was suspicious, I was afraid, all of the above. And I sat by the door, as close to the door as possible, so I could leave if anyone was a bit odd. And I saw this beautiful pixie soul opposite me with another beautiful pixie soul who I didn't actually realize at the time was your mum.
My actual mum.
Your actual mum. And I never asked you, and I sort of thought, I really should have asked her, did her mum want to come anyway? Was she like, yeah, I'm going to come to this magical event? Or did Kay bring her as her own shield, like her own protective shield? I never asked you that question. I want to know. Tell me.
I told her about it. She said, that sounds great, you should go. And then a few days later she went, can I come?
Oh.
And then of course we did this big ritual play, and I was Persephone and she was Demeter, and we got to kind of play out those things. But on that very first day I was like, I'm here with my mum Ra. I should definitely speak to other people instead of but I too was like, they're weirdos, but we were like on the far side of the room away from the door, and I was like, I am going to speak to someone. And so I like marched up to you and I went, I need to speak to someone, I'm speaking to you. And you went, I'm sitting by the door in case you're all freaks. And that is
Yes,
beautiful story of how we met.
it's the beautiful story.
About 20 years ago, 21 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, it was a long time ago now, I'm not going to lie. And I think that we can both say safely that we exacerbated each other's weirdness to the fullest possible extent.
Yeah, much to
And
our
it was awesome.
continual amusement.
Much to our continual amusement, and it was just like the best thing I ever did. So if anyone is here in the heart space and they're going, I've been online for a long time, but I should go and I should do an in-person event, go and do it. Go and do it, because that is how you find your people, isn't it? Sort of like energetically, we could do so much when we connect here online, and we see what people say, and we see the story that people choose to offer about themselves in online spaces, which is often quite heavily mediated because we are, filtering for the weirdos, or say, how do I want to present myself? It can be quite a censored experience in some ways.
I think it was less filtered back then than it is now. Now I think it's a bit of a minefield, knowing what's true story and what's not. And also we've had all the depths and the layers and the strange messy bits of stories stripped away by online, because now we've got tweets and reels and everything so clipped and polished, and we've lost the raw edges of even what's being offered as, hey, this is like a big soul calling song. So much of it is so neat and tidy. I'm like, is it, or is this a social media story? You know what I mean?
I think you're right, and it's a really good point, because it makes me think about, and we are going to talk about healing story, everybody, don't worry, but it does make me realize, I think about the work that I do with healing story. One of the reasons I love it so much is because it is an expansive, open, raw, slow exploration. It's not difficult to say, and here's a snippet.
Yeah, it doesn't work in a snippet.
It builds layer upon layer upon layer upon layer as you go through. And and I've been offering healing story through the hearth space and through the hearth space inner circle. I did that for 3 years, and our inner circle is just closing, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to be offering healing story, which I'm doing at the moment, but it's evolving all of the time. And I know that for you, your journey into healing forms and then bringing story, which has always been that, or both of us have used voice in our work for a very long period of time. But I would say that the offering of story is now more powerful and more potent and more present in both of our work than was even the case when we were working together, running a business together, running a shamanic business together.
Much more so, yeah. And for me, it's because I didn't realize how much it was part of my healing work. So much of, I try not to do this so much now, and I've noticed that you're the same, that we used to have like, oh, here's like the magical bit of my work over here, and here's my healing stuff, and oh, maybe some coaching stuff over here. I'm also a writer, but that's over here, and things that, and these things, like, I'm here, and these are all the things that I do, and actually kind of that's really been an exercise in story for me, finding where all of those things do in some form the same work. They have a lovely narrative weaving flow between all the things, which I didn't acknowledge before. I tried to keep a lot of things separate. But for the healing story thing, I'd always thought of myself as a writer. And when I was a child, my sanctuary was in stories. It was in books. I read a book every single day when I was a little child. It used to drive my mum insane. I used to like have like little torches and like hide them in my bed, because if I hadn't finished my book and my mum made me go to bed, like that was bad because I had to finish the book that day. So I'd be like hidden under the covers, like finishing my book of the day. I was just like ravenous for like stories. I was obsessed with them from when I was little, and I still just, I love to be surrounded by books all the time. I love stories. And I always considered that because they weren't healing stories to my mind, they were stories, they were novels, they were fairy tales, they were, little short stories, all of these things. I didn't actually realize how much my work as a writer and as a reader, first of all, I didn't realize how much sanctuary that gave me when I was little.
Yeah.
Before I understood what healing ceremony was, when I was a kid, that was where my safety and my sanctuary was. But when I went to Dartmoor last year on a residential retreat. It was 5 long weekends over 6 months with Martin Shaw of the West Country School of Myth, which I would recommend to anybody. And that's where he told stories, and I was physically and emotionally altered by these stories. And I went, oh God, I sat here and a guy told me a story in a room full of, at that point, strangers. They were not strangers by the end of the night. Those glorious groups where we walked in, and some of those people I still talk to so often. It was such a powerful thing, and it made me realize that a really big story, a really deep story, not a neat story, not a sanitized story, not a snippet of a story, but really just a story, is a shamanic healing experience. And then I went, oh yes, it's the same stuff. And that was like a final piece of the puzzle for me to integrate the identity of my writer self with my healer self, as to speak to like that you use. We have these archetypal forces, and it was like the last sort of barrier melted down. Go, no, it's the same work, and it was life-changing for me.
Oh yeah. I love that, and you do, I've known you a long time, and you look so happy. Actually look so happy. And I know you've got your master's degree in creative writing, all of these other things, and we're weaving these strands together for such a long time. And
You don't see it till you're later in the story, do you? You don't go, oh, hang on, I've been braiding this together for decades, and now I see it.
Yeah, you find your purpose in retrospect, don't you? When you look back over the path you've gone and go, oh, that makes sense. That's the narrative that I didn't know where that was going.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can feel that coming through. I can see people here joining us live, which is lovely. So hello to people who are joining us live. It's lovely to see you. If you give us a wave, give us a hello, tell us that you're here, you're having a lovely time. If you're joining us for the recording, and I know a lot of people will be joining us via the recording, just put #replay, just say #replay, give us a hello. And I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask Kay a question, but I'm going to ask the same question of everybody else. If you're watching this live or as a video, this is a question for you. This is if you feel back into the past, what stories or story equivalent to one of them were healing for you, and why? What stories were healing for you and why? I'm going to ask Kay the question, but yeah, if you're here live, do share, because I want to know.
I think it's the story that I'm starting to work with again, that I've been working with on and off for about 18 months or so now, maybe a little longer. It's a long time. It's called The Moon Palace, and it's a really, really old Inuit story, and it was actually told to me on the first weekend by Martin Shaw. I'm not sure which of his books it's in, if any of them. It's a fantastic story, and it's really a story of loss and heartbreak, and how we rally and cope with that to the onward magnificence of our lives, but to the real detriment of our souls, and the bravery required to kind of step back into presence. And that weekend, the main story of the weekend was Red Bead Woman, which is a really old Siberian story, which I told to you in the Blue Lagoon in Iceland, because that's the best location to tell a story ever while bobbing around in the water.
Yeah.
And that story is huge, and that was the main theme of the weekend. But on that weekend, I barely heard that story because he told the Moon Palace first. And it lodged and jolted and awakened me to, I was so freaked out by it. And I was with a friend of mine who said, oof, the Moon Palace, hey, you live there? And I was like, yeah, well, I know that now. And it made me realize how a story was going to help me. And it's the very definition of a messy story. That doesn't have a tiny ending. There's so much of it that you don't understand and you can't explain, and there's nothing you can do except sit with the weird symbolism of it. And so I treated that story. First of all, the reason it changed me is because it called me back into my body and asked me to be present in my grief and in my physicality, and it was life-changing just to follow what that story had asked me to do. But also it made me connect with story in such a powerful shamanic way, because it was such an enormous shift for me as a story. I performed ceremony to it. I made incense for it. I treated it almost like a god, and I shamanic journeyed into it. And through that, I was able to use the story as a map to heal myself. And it's an ongoing process because it's a big mythic story. But yeah, I know it's a story that most people won't know, but I'm going to be doing some work with that story early next year, so I'll talk more about that later in case people want to hear it. But it's it really, really changed me in just a spiritual way and a physical way, and it changed my understanding of how I do the work. Just a story, huh?
Wow. But we say that, don't we? We say just a story, but yet it is so much more than that, isn't it? And it's I love the way we can receive gifts in it. They often span cultures. Now, sometimes stories are very, very culturally specific, and they are intended for people of that culture.
Yes.
Sometimes they hold archetypal truths. People talk about archetypal truths, don't they? Sometimes they do both.
Yes.
You know, there's a personal and a collective or a local aspect of stories that are intended to heal. Oh, I
Yeah.
was going to ask you actually, but I think that's an interesting point. Is you mentioned, you know, I used to read. I was reading books. I was reading stories all the time, and I didn't realize they were healing stories. Do you? There's something about whether a story needs to be intended for healing, for it to offer healing.
Well, it's interesting to me. I think it does, because it's art, right? No one, I mean, I think there will be some stories you respond to and some stories you don't. And maybe there'll be stories that are really well written and really well created and do have some kind of soul in them, like all real art does. But maybe it's not for you, and that's why you're not responding. But maybe when people are just creating formulaic stuff or commercial stuff, they're not pouring their soul into it. When we do that, you know, I did my MA in creative writing, and I wrote a novel and then completely rewrote the novel when I kind of came to understand that actually I'm working through a lot of trauma in this. So the writing process healed me. And then it was really, I did a lot of ceremony with that book too. There's an intention in there that it heals. And I think I used to read a lot of like Enid Blyton stuff, you know, the Magic Faraway Tree was like my absolute favorite. And there was so much about children escaping from their day-to-day lives and going into these fantastical places and meeting magical creatures. And wasn't that speaking to something?
Yes. Yeah.
So one of my friends told me once that she thought the story that we loved the most as children would somehow manifest in our lives. And I was like, well, in mine, I was like, it's the Magic Faraway Tree. So I was like going into different worlds, alternate realities, and go, wait, it's shamanism, you know?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I have to say, Magic Faraway Tree, that was by far my favourite Enid Blyton.
Oh, was it?
It absolutely was.
It.
I love Moonface and Silky,
Silky.
and all of the ones. And I'm reading them to my children now. And I look back on it and I realise that there are parts of that series that I remember that don't exist.
Right. Because it was just speaking to like opening up the imagination of children. And there's something we might look at that and say, well, that's not a healing story, but isn't it? Isn't art saying to children, you can escape into another world? Like that's literally what books did for me when I was a child. I don't know how I would have been okay without the ability to escape and fully visualize and anchor myself in an alternative world. Turned out to be really handy as a shamanic practitioner in later life, which probably wasn't Enid Blyton's intention.
Possibly not, but who knows? Who knows?
Because the art was created with the intention for children to go and have that imaginative journey. I don't that you know, we need a wider definition of what a healing intention is. The stories we respond to are ones that speak to things that make us feel that we're understood and that we're not alone, and that is healing. So it doesn't have to be about a healing thing, it can be about anything, the stories that speak to us.
I think you're right, and as you're speaking it makes me wonder whether I was listening to Radio 4 earlier today, and I can't remember the name of the program, which is ridiculous to me, and if I find it I'll post it, but you know I love a bit of Radio 4.
I do.
And they were talking about the power of words. They were talking about Benjamin Zephaniah, who's died, and his huge, like, so powerful work. You know, you feel it there when someone who's had such an impact through their words and through his other, you know, he was a massive activist as well. And they were talking about him, and then they were talking about story. And they said there is so much story in the world today that harms, that we need more story that heals. And I was just like, well, thank you so much for, you know, mentioning this at the time that I'm about to meet with Kay. Tick off of that to get me thinking in that way. And I think that perhaps a healing story is a healing story if the person who writes it, whatever it is, and it might be a few paragraphs offered on social media, or somebody's doing a radio interview, or whatever it is, if the person finds healing or is looking for healing for themselves through that story, then it has the potential to offer healing to others as well. That would be my sense, because there are so many, there is a lot of venom and vitriol and harmfully intended
Mm-hmm.
words and narratives out there in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
maybe
there is. And also, you know, if you've crafted a story with like a true intent of even of just telling a story of, or of making like a piece of fiction or writing a poem or whatever, if you've done that from a true place, once it's done, if you put it out into the world, I feel like that's gone now. That's, you can't control how that's received by another person. So they could receive a different healing than you intended.
yes.
Kind of what's in there and what you've, which is why we have to write stuff that's true, even if it's fiction. It has to be, we have to speak from that. And when we write things that aren't true, I think we can cause harm. But when we write things that are true, I think it's easier for us to kind of create a real space for healing. Can I say, I met Benjamin Zephaniah when I was 14.
No.
Yeah, he came to my school to be a poet in residence for the day. And I always really liked poetry. And, you know, there's been various people that, and Martin Shaw, not to like bang on like he's the Messiah, he's just a great storyteller. He also used to make us write a poem every morning when we were there, and it sort of, and gave us permission to be poets, you know, regardless of how it comes out. He would only give us 5 minutes to write it, and it really reconnected me with my poet self. But when I was a child, I loved poetry, but I thought it was for people who were cleverer than me. And I went to a school that I was not the type of person that normally goes there. It was an entrance exam thing, but that usually means you have money, and I didn't have any. So it was a real uncomfortably middle class place. And I was like a working class kid. I found it really hard in there. And he was such a weird oddity in that like incredibly white middle class place that I found myself. And he was just this extraordinary presence. And he said to me, you know, poetry doesn't, it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to sound like what you think poetry sounds like. He said, you can be funny and you could be mean. And I wrote a poem about a mean old lady in a supermarket, and I read it at a very serious school event, and everyone laughed and like loved it, and it felt great. And I've always remembered that about Benjamin Zephaniah.
But there's such a great life lesson, isn't it, from him? And it's true, people, when it's when you write about what's true, people feel it. I mean, you did your creative writing masters. I did my wild voice facilitation, so I trained as a wild voice facilitator, and I did that because having someone else support me in accessing that true voice, which is very much sounds like what you're talking about with Martin Shaw as well. As I worked with Kate Wolf, having somebody who is able to support me in a process that supports me in dropping into that place where I find my true voice was so incredibly powerful. I wanted to offer that to others as well. There's healing story that we offer to people, and there's healing story that we help people to access for themselves as well, isn't there?
Agreed. And Benjamin Zephaniah, as an activist, spoke to the importance of a collective story as well. One of my favorite things about him was that he was offered an OBE, I think, about 20 years ago. And when you turn down an OBE, they tell you, like, can you not say anything about it? And he was like, I'm actually going to write a really like visceral editorial about it. And I remember reading it thinking, God, I remember really thinking you were great when I met you, and now I think you're great again, because he spoke to the story of empire and why, you know, glossing over that and going, oh, I've got a knighthood or whatever. Like, I know people have their own views on this, and you know, I'm a militant anti-monarchist lefty, but he was just like standing true to his principles in that moment, and then speaking out about it in a way, you know, that was always kind of what he stood for. And I love that with his actions he continued to tell that really a story of like integrity and activism, and speaking to quality and the truth of how to feel included in Britain. All those kinds of things are really important in his work. So if he'd have gone down and you know, curtsied in front of the Queen or whatever, it would have undone, I think, the story to a certain extent, because that's not what he believes.
And he was also there's such a correct courage about that, in terms of saying, I can either perpetuate a wound, and I'm not going to do, he was never going to do that, was he? I'm never going to perpetuate the wound, or I can expose the wound and give it air and make it, you know, more obvious. Because I know when I heard that story for the first time, I realized that I had never in my mind connected those three letters, OBE, MBE, CB, whatever they are, and empire. It never connected them together. And I realized, yeah, I don't know enough about that. And that made me think, not that I'm ever expecting to get an MBE, by the way, just to be really clear, but that idea of, when someone can offer you something and it's like, this feels flattering, or it's like an award, or it's an accolade, or it's something, and you feel good about it, and you go, oh, thank you so much, that's so wonderful, that's so brilliant. And he exposed that in that one moment for me. He said, no, I'm not going to accept anything without looking under the hood first.
Yes. Yeah.
To know what it actually means, and what it means to me, and what it might mean to the people around me. It was incredibly powerful act.
Yeah.
A lot of people would have just gone, oh, well, I'll just politely turn it down and I won't say.
Yeah, no, but that's not who he was. He was an activist, real activist. He
was. And that if you don't mind, because I was thinking about my healing stories. And the ones that had spoken to me, and it just feels like the right time, because I was thinking, where is the one where I sort of felt down into my solar plexus? I'm working on my solar plexus at the moment, and I've been drinking a lot of turmeric and pineapple and things like that. I know, very delicious one I had yesterday. It was fine. Beside the point, Maggie, keep on track. And so I was like, what speaks to me right now? And I realized that for me it was Angela Carter and The Bloody Chamber, her collection of short fairy tale stories. And not only were they wonderful and brilliant, but she gave, not necessarily me, but I felt as if through those stories she was giving people permission to just be like, you can work with stories that you think that you think are somehow like inviolable, that are the very bones of a culture. And you can strip away all of the flesh that's been placed upon them and recover those story bones and breathe new life into them in a really like visceral, quite violent way. Yeah. She turned the violence that is in those fairy tales around.
Yeah. She invited us to look at it and sit in it. And especially as women, let's sit and talk, tell these stories in a way that is uncomfortable, because we're not supposed to do that. That's activism too.
Yes, that is activism too. When I talk to people, when they do my quiz, and I work with them on their magical selves, I always say to people, if you're a healer, you are also an activist. Now, if you are standing in your power truly, there's the part of you that embraces and holds and loves and nurtures, but there is also the activist that will not tolerate violence and greed and hatred and cruelty and all of those things, and will stand against it as well. I think that story can play both of those roles. It can play like multiple healing roles. It can expose things like the presence of empire within an MBE. It can bring that to the fore. It can expose wounds. It can heal wounds. Sometimes it can create wounds in places that really need it, because the narrative has become one that we don't want in the world.
And all the really deep healing, I mean, you can go and have a nice relaxing, soothing healing, but if you're going to do anything that goes really deep, there's a ruthlessness required for that level of the work. I ask my students and my clients for a really rigorous self-evaluation in all the things that they're doing, and a ruthless self-honesty in order to do the work, which means you have to sit here and go, ooh, that was me. I did this thing, and not to berate ourselves, because that's a really tough line to walk. What's that story telling me? Where are the roots of that? What's it from? I know where it's from. It's this. And then follow it down and stalk it all the way along to where it comes from, until you can unravel that narrative, and then come to a place where there's no bitterness in it, no anger in it, and trauma work requires us to do that. And if we're going to remove ourselves from a constantly looping kind of story in our own trauma, we have got to be really, really kind to ourselves and do that healing and that nourishing and that self-care. But we must be ruthless as well and say, well, this can't go on, and we must push ourselves forward as well. And it's just that's a constant game of rebalancing, to not be too hard on ourselves and cause more wounding, but not to coddle ourselves and set up camp in that wounded space and live in an identity, a story of ourselves as, you know, the shit that happened to us when we were young, when we were in this bad relationship, or when we were in this or in that. You know, that can become our story.
Yeah.
A lot of healing is rewriting that story, or even unraveling it and seeing, oh, okay, well, I can see how these traumas actually link together, like in a delicious Louise Hay way, not in like a sort of low-level The Secret way, but like in a proper, what Louise Hay really said is, these are things that happen to you that you carry, and you are creating a narrative out of that, and that's your power. So what if we were kind about that, but also we were really, really, really observant about it, and then we acknowledged our power to tell a different story? That's effectively what Louise Hay was saying, you know. And I've always been such a huge advocate of her work, because everyone goes, oh, it's just affirmations. It's not at all. It's an opportunity to like look into what you're carrying in your own bones and see why it's there. Like, pull out the pre-verbal stuff. This is why, like, the old big stories, the myths and legends, and like the really big spiritual stories that can't be easily broken down, those stories are really powerful for us, because they're speaking to something that's sort of like beyond the conscious mind a little bit, aren't they? You know, and so you have to go, okay, I'm not sure why this is working for me, but I just need to sit with it and trust it. And that's part of healing work as well.
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. And I know with my embodiment coach, Susie Heath, who's wonderful, will say that she does a lot of body work that's with trauma, and she says you don't actually need to know.
Yeah, that's
true. There are a lot of analysis therapies out there in the world, aren't there? Which, like, we're going to go in, we're going to analyze,
and they might be helpful for a bit of it, but you'll never get the whole thing with your brain.
No, you'll never get the whole thing with your brain. And sometimes it is important to name it and to know it, and other times it's just I don't need to know it. So sometimes working through the body is appropriate, and sometimes working through story that allows us to almost it's like a web or a net of words that draws something to the surface for you that might be more than those words, it doesn't fit perfectly with the story, but the story allows that to be sort of scooped up and held and worked with.
Most definitely. And at the West Country School of Myth down in Dartmoor, what they would say to us at different points in the story would be, where are you in the story? That's what he would always ask us. Because if you go, oh, I really like this story because I really feel very aligned with the knight going out on the quest. You don't get to do that. You might be aligned with that in that moment. That might be where you find yourself now. But the story is a whole universe, and we are sort of almost like contained within it, and contain all of it within us. So like the evil sorceress is also there. At what point are you that? It's like at some point you're all of these people, and that you can't do through analysis. You have to do that through feeling, I guess. And that's almost like a vibrational thing, like your body responds to something. And that's a part of the healing, in all kinds of healing work, that we can't avoid. The stuff that we can name will only be part of it, I think. And that's true of story as well, weirdly, given that it's an art form that relies entirely on words.
Yes. But what am I saying? But it's similar to what you say about with people. We can find a rapport with somebody, can't we? We can say, I don't know why I like this person. They might not have actually spoken that much. But you like vibe with them, and we can vibe with story in the same way, or with a character or a landscape in a story for a very long period of time. And part of that healing process is the way in which we're programmed to make meaning. Humans just are programmed to make meaning, aren't they? So you could listen to one story and make one meaning about it and resonate with one character, and that's your healing journey that year. And then you hear the same story like 10 years, 20 years later, and the meaning that you take from it is entirely different, and the
Yes.
character that you resonate with is entirely different.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think that, and I'm quite I love a reread of stories, and I can find myself in different places with them. It will be a different experience the next time that I read them. And especially for those really big, those stories that have got a nice sweeping epic landscape that they're playing on, there's much more room for us to like zoom in on a different bit of it. But that's true of for example, like courses like your Yggdrasil's Path, for example, you know, you could have people go in and revisit that later, and you wouldn't get the same things in the journey. You wouldn't get the same information because you're coming at it as a different version of yourself. If you go back 5 years later and do it again, because all of that is about communicating with our kind of internal story, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. There are some courses that we might go on and we might say, oh, I'm going on to experience a deeper learning. I think you can always go back and do that. And there are others where it is an entirely different initiatory process that you're going through, in that point.
Yeah.
Oh, which is that's a really nice segue. Well done into my second question. Oh, I should say I've got you there. Into my second question, which is it's a big topic. So I'm going to introduce it, and then we'll just see the way into it, because it's the difference for me between what we might think of as being an idea of completeness, of, if you like imagine somebody writing a book and then they get an editor and they tweak all of the little bits and they do the little thing and then it's out there and it's done and it's not changed. And we have quite a lot of that, I would say, in the modern world because of the written word. The written word is very, very, perhaps a little bit less so than used to be the case 20 years ago because of what we could do with the internet and all of those things, but it's still there. There's an authority, like literally an author, isn't there? Yeah. This person owns this story. This is the definitive version. Or look, there's a different editor, and therefore it's a slightly different version. But there's this idea of a point of when it's finished. It's finished now, and it's done, and it's complete. But when I think about healing, and I think about the root of the word for healing being the same as the root of what it means to be whole, to experience wholeness in the moment. And I think about stories that, for me, the types of stories that we work with are alive. And you might tell one story in a particular way on one occasion, and then you might tell it in a different way on another occasion.
Yeah.
Does that make either of them wrong, either of them better? What does it mean to support healing through story as a process rather than and now we're done. Here's one problem, and this story has fixed that problem, and well done.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of ways that stories are evolving and changing, even by people going back and revisiting old stories. I mean, oral storytelling is such a glorious way to do it, and really that's been only a recent. I'm not even a person who listens to audiobooks or anything. It's really, so for me, oral storytelling, it reminds me of like being in theatre school when I was young. It's a performance, and each performance on a given night will be different, even if the script is the same, because you'll respond to an audience in a certain way and things like that. So, but in a more kind of healing and ceremonial way to that. So the oral traditions of storytelling, I think, are really popular again now in a way that they haven't been for a long time. And that means that we're looking at like a living story, a living tradition that will be told differently that day, because you'll be bringing in even like expressions and words that have been used earlier that day in that group. You know what I mean? Yes. So you'll bring that in, and you'll be kind of as we would call it, spirit-led in the work. So you're still honoring like the true seed and the essence of the story, but changing it around a little bit. And I really enjoy that. And I've come across a lot recently of opportunities to like dive into story, to kind of explore them in ways that are designed to promote healing. So there's an amazing storyteller called Bernadette Russell, She is actually, she did during lockdown, she did this storytelling around the trees in Abbey Wood, down where I live. Yeah, it was one of the.
If you're wondering, I used to live very close to Abbey Wood.
Yes,
They
sorry,
obviously
that's
did as
a
well.
really random thing that I just said. Like, you know, the woods that you know.
Yes.
And she does incredible storytelling work around London, and she's based in Southeast London now, which is really great. But she runs little storytelling evenings online through Treadwell's, actually, which is obviously like a magical kind of book, and that's what it's known for. But I went to one of them recently, and the story that she was telling was Rumpelstiltskin, which we all remember from being kids.
Yes.
Brought in, she like researched all these different versions of it. She's really well versed in that kind of storytelling, and so she brought in little phrases into it that I hadn't heard before, and she had us take away moments of the story and say, hey, what if the ending was different? What would the child be like then? And really encouraged us to write these new worlds spinning off of like certain parts of the story. And I think that kind of invitation into story is more common now, and one of the ways that we're seeing that in a more mainstream way is people rewriting the myths from alternate perceptions, perspective even.
Yes.
So, for example, Madeline Miller is like
Anita Gill, she does a lot of work with that as well, doesn't she?
Yes, and Pat Barker, The Women of Troy, incredible, powerful works to kind of correct. We don't want to overcorrect old stories and say that those things didn't happen, because there's something from historical story that is speaking to something from that time, and if you overly dramatize it, you take away the soul of the story. But there's also an acknowledgement that all of those stories were written down and told and captured by men, and these were about wars that were fought by men. And so what if these women characters we never speak to their feelings, so what if we were able to insert ourselves into those stories as women? So that kind of thing's really interesting, and in that way a story can come alive. And Circe by Madeline Miller, such a powerful story from the woman's, and it doesn't take away any of the parts of the myth. It just asks us to sit in that story in a different way. I feel like I'm seeing, maybe just because, I don't know, maybe it's just the algorithm showing it to me all the time because I'm obviously obsessed with such things, but I do feel like there's we're all being asked to look at these stories in new ways. And so we're keeping them alive, not in a stupid way, like going back through Roald Dahl books and taking out references to people's, they want to rewrite some of the stories, take out words that we might find a bit offensive. Now, either you explain to your children that those are things that were said before, or let's leave space for a new story to come in, but don't go in and clean up an old story in an unnecessary way unless you're going to bring something powerful to it. Let's have new authors come in with new voices and give them a take on it as society is changing, rather than go back and just
sort of scrubbing out bits. It's interesting you talk about, because we're talking about Enid Blyton, and I'm reading Enid Blyton's to my children right now, and obviously I don't remember, I read them some of them now and I'm like, what am I going to do with that? And I have, sometimes I do, I'm like, we need to finish, and we don't have 15 minutes to discuss what this means, and so I will censor out. But if we have enough time, I will say it, and then we'll do that exploration together. So the one I use quite a lot is because they're both boys, and there is a lot of the girls went and washed up with things at the stream, while the boys went and that like that Julian, the old, he always has the money, it's all sort of really interesting. And so I was thinking, what would it feel like to you to know that you weren't trusted to do the washing up, that you weren't allowed to do? We talk about that together, and there was
there are ways to explain that stories are from different places and different times. You don't have to amend them to the current sensibilities, otherwise we risk losing what's real about a story. And I think we, especially when we're dealing with adult or older, or when we're not dealing with little children here, we're kind of assuming stupidity in our audience. We're not able to see that. And so, I don't think we need to go in and write it in current language. Otherwise, you'd be constantly redoing them. And And actually that can happen in oral storytelling. We can draw on certain things anyway, draw in ways of telling it that are natural while still pulling in the soul of the story. But if you just go in and clean up and edit in a way that's, I don't know, there's a better way to do it. And also, let's make space for new stories is the thing that annoys me as well. There are great artists who still want to speak and be activists now. Don't go in and you know, make sure no one knew that, you know, Roald Dahl made comments about people being fat. That stuff just doesn't matter compared to, you know, the voices that need to be emerging into, you know, we should all be doing.
Yes, I mean, it's very true. It's a balance, isn't it? It's that balance of we all do it. You know, every generation needs to sort of kick back against what's come before.
Yeah.
But we tend to do it either by vilifying, you know, that's totally wrong, and that's really bad, and I'm going to be looking at that, or by perfectionizing, you know, whereas actually it's quite helpful to have a conversation saying Enid Blyton could have been an absolutely wonderful person at the time, and we considered to be a wonderful person at the time, and could have been nice like you or me, and yet nice people are capable of holding beliefs that we find horrific, you know, and that is also a story that we need our children to know, isn't it? And and that there is raw, beautiful, vibrant talent out there in the world today.
Yeah.
We also need to love.
We don't need new versions of James and the Giant Peach. Not that I don't love it, by the way. I was a huge Roald Dahl fan as a child. But what about stories that are speaking, rather than trying to clean up stories around body image or something or whatever? What about allowing a real life author today to write stories for our children today that talk about things that are relevant today? How about we do that? Because storytelling is all of our heritage. We're trying to, it feels like kind of pulling it back to the things that we've accepted our stories. Well, hey, it should be constantly evolving.
Yes,
Stories,
you're absolutely right.
we want more voices, and you know, part of the reason that our stories were getting a bit too, you know, a lot of voices weren't being heard that are now being heard. A lot of people that come from, you know, that aren't, you know, old white straight Christian guys, you know what I mean?
Yes.
They can write great stories too, but I want to hear stories that are grounded in other places. And that's how you promote a diversity of opinion, not by editing stuff out. If you don't like what's in the book, don't read that book, read a different book.
or read it and give yourself permission to disagree with it.
Yeah, and then read a different one and go, I like this one better. Write one. Please write one.
Yes, because you know what, when we read, we are also learning what our own voice wants to say, aren't we? And that's part of healing as well.
It is, and a lot of storytelling stuff, you know, particularly in terms of like novels, I think about this a lot, that we want to be spoken to, we want to see ourselves in those novels to a certain extent, we want to understand and feel understood in those readings. But I also really love to read stuff that's grounded in a land that I've never been to, that speaks to something that's totally alien to me, and that's really, and I really try and seek those out. And it's much easier now than it used to be, because the permission to tell stories has been opened up to so many different voices, and that there's no intention of healing as we would phrase it in that, but there is something deeply healing about it, isn't there?
Oh, it's a fascinating topic. Yes, I'm feeling into that now, and I feel like this is a perfect time now, perhaps to share a little bit of healing writing of story that you have been crafting. What have you been working on? What would you like to share with us?
Well, yeah, I thought I'd share a story today. I mean, I am going to be working with some deeper stories next year. I'm going to be working from January. I'm going to be sharing a story of the month, and I'm going to start with the Moon Palace, which is the one that I spoke about before. And I'm going to offer like a package of work to kind of engage with those stories as though they are healing ceremonies, and kind of support that work, which I think will be really interesting. So my mind has been engaged in that, but I've been thinking a lot around the retelling of the personal story. And at the last Healing Through the Wheel of the Year, I did a lot of ancestral work. And I know that you also talk a lot about, you know, some of the stories are wider than us and ground us in a place or a heritage, but some of them can be more personal.
Yeah.
And last year, a year ago, I was asked in a storytelling group to write a story of my ancestor, just to pick one ancestor and research their story and tell it. But this was a Martin Shaw thing as well. He asked us, said, find an ancestral story that you have that is in some way mythic, which sounds insane. You just go, how? Because it seems so big. But his point was like, there is something mythic in our heritage. There are stories that are wide reaching and have like a universal thinness, and they speak to our bones. Find one of those in your own family. So what I thought I would share with you tonight is the story that I wrote about that, which I do have up on my website, and it's just a story of my great grandmother.
Oh, please, that'd be wonderful.
Seek the weaving together of the wider narrative and the older narrative, the mythic and the magical with the personal. So I thought you would approve.
I do indeed approve. And I think it's a beautiful exercise as well to do.
I really recommend
powerful.
It was incredibly powerful, and it made me like, there's only so many people still alive that have stories about that person. And, you know, it actually really, it fundamentally changed my relationship with my mother through taking her out and sitting down with her and saying, can you please tell me the stories you know? And she was like, oh, well, I don't know them very well. I didn't think anyone would be interested in her. Tell me all of them, all the half remembered stories, all the little things. And once you start doing that, then you start conjuring up the essence of the people you're talking about, and it really bonded us. It was lovely.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, it is very powerful. I remember I had a similar experience when my mum edited my grandmother's biography and then her brother's biography after he died, and she's been writing her own, and that it is an immense gift.
Yeah,
you know, to share story, intimate family story in that way across generations.
Yeah, because I come from a family of mediums, so there were a lot of things that we would just talk about. It kind of really linked me into that heritage, which I always knew was there, but it made me feel into it. But they're not people who have ever written stuff down, really. So yeah, it's good to have it. Shall I read it?
Please do. Please do.
It's about 10 minutes, so a little longer. Be comfy.
Settle in, people, then. Settle in.
Settle in for a little story.
Get your drink, make yourself warm, and listen to Kay's story.
Comfy. The story of my great grandmother. In 1888, in Rotherhithe, southeast London, Minnie Maud Matilda Williams was born. She grew up in a small house in Deptford, also southeast London, in a large family, as everyone did back then. Deptford is a bit rough around the edges today, but back then and for many years afterwards, Deptford was a slum. I don't know much about her parents, but if I was going to guess, I'd say that her mum had a special gift, and that of all of her children, Minnie was the only one who inherited that gift. But I'd just be guessing. As a teenager, Min, that's what they called her, they shortened it to Min, also received a different gift to the story I'm going to tell you today. Min met the love of her life. His name was Henry Stedman. She called him Harry Stedman. Min and Harry adored each other. I know that because I have copies of his letters from the Western Front. Every other sentence started, my dear Min. My dear Min, kiss the kiddies for me. My dear Min, do cheer up. You know I'm coming back from France. My dear Min, did you get that to Bob off Johnny Lawrence? My dear Min, please do send me some nosegay. They loved each other, Harry and Min. It was a marriage so happy it was talked about for generations. If I trace my matrilineal line back directly, me, Shelley, Sylve, Lynn, Min, she was the last one who ever had a happy marriage and a great love. That's just something we're talking at the moment, me and Min, over the ancestral fires. Anyway, they lived together in Deptford, and in the 1910s, it was still a long way from any kind of gentrification. They had a small house. They had a lot of kids. I think one died as a baby, another as a young child, but they had 4 children who lived long into adulthood: Ada, Maud, Harry, and my great-grandmother, Lily, who they all called Lil. The house wasn't impressive. There was no bathroom. They shared an outhouse with some of the neighbours. But as my mum, my nan, and even my nanny Lil would say, money and class aren't the same thing. How you keep your house and how you present yourself is what shows the class of person you are. Min scrubbed the front doorstep every day. She kept the entrance to her house gleaming clean, so everyone who came there knew what class of person they were dealing with. I'm sure the inside of the house was gleaming too. It had to be, because of all her visitors. The local women would come and see Min. They would tell her what was going on with them, their romantic problems, their health, their worries about their kids. And Min would hold their hands and she'd give them a cup of tea. Sounds quite normal, but she had that gift. When she held their hands, it would be palm up. She would look at the lines and the markings and feel what came from them as she did it, and she would read them. Sometimes the dead would speak to her and she'd pass on what they said. When her guests finished their cups of tea, she would turn the cup upside down and turn it clockwise 3 times before writing it and reading their fortunes in the patterns in the tea leaves. This was her gift. I can't imagine the fear of her husband having to fight the war in Europe, what we now call the First World War. I can't believe she'd also see a second one. But she knew, because of her gift, she knew, as Harry said in his letters, that he would make it back from France. He did, wounded. I have a letter he wrote from the military hospital in Maidstone. And he did make it back to Deptford. He brought back a cross he'd chiselled from a bullet with the names of the battles he'd fought in. I know that because I've held it. My mum keeps it on her ancestral altar. But he died not long after, complications from his surgery, I think. I don't know if she knew it. I don't know if she saw it before it happened. If she did, probably it didn't feel like a gift. The government were paying widows the pensions they needed to raise their kids. And as I said, she really needed it. The government back then weren't very efficient, if you can imagine that. And although she took in work as a washerwoman while she chased and waited for the pension she was due, all this during her grief at losing her beloved husband, it didn't come quickly enough. Her children were hungry and she couldn't make ends meet. She didn't want to remarry and knew no one could replace Harry, but she also knew, without reading any palms or any tea leaves, that she wasn't going to be able to feed their children if she didn't. So she accepted a proposal. She married a widower called Robert Diath. Yes, this lady, this reader, this one in touch with the spirits. When her love died, she married death. The government contacted her to let her know her pension was granted, an offer they hastily retracted on finding out she was now married. So she had her 4 kids, and now she had her 4 stepchildren. And over the coming years, she had 4 more children, because that's how it went in those days. Life continued to be hard. People continued to come to her for readings. When the Second World War came, she was an older lady. Many of her children had children of their own. She still lived a hard life in Deptford. Down there by the docks, the bombings were devastating. Her house was destroyed in the Blitz. They called it getting bombed out, and she had to find another place to live. She was bombed out there too. The third house was bombed out. 3 times she lost her house and the little she had left, but the third time she was home. The crashing down of the house around her was total, and the blast threw an armchair up into the air that landed upside down with her underneath. She survived under there for 2 days, and the local people dug her out. Minnie Maud Matilda was a woman made of strong stuff. Us women come from strong stock, my mum always says. Despite everything the others have lived through, it's Min she's thinking of. She never met her. My mum, Shelley, was born 1960, the same year Min died. But let's go back to that gift. Min read palms, she read tea leaves, and she spoke to the dead. I tried to find out if there was a name for it, but we don't have a word for it in our family. It's just what the women do. 1 woman in every group. Of her Stedman children, it was Lily, my nanny Lil. She had other children, the Diath kids, and one was so loved by the original 4, they never called her half-sister. She was the oldest of them, and her name was Sophie. My nan and my mum called her Aunt Soph. Lil had it, and Aunt Soph had it. They had that gift. Lil had 5 children, and one of the daughters, Sylvia, who we all called Sylv, she had it. She really had it. Sylv had only 2 children who lived, and one of them was a daughter. Just one daughter. Min never met her, but Sylv, Lil, and Soph, the women in their groups, all agreed Shelley had it. She had the gift. 1966, at 6 years old, my mum Shelley would be allowed to go with her mum to Aunt Soph's house. Sylv and Lil were both there, and some local women, all struggling working class women in southeast London with marriages, children, and money problems. They would make the time, and Aunt Soph would host. They would sit at the dining table, and there they would conduct a séance. If my mum was very good and did not fidget or make noise, she was allowed to sit and listen to the dead. Lil had a tough life, but a long one. She died when I was 9, and I remember her well. I have one of her rings. My mum remembers Lil showing her, as Min had shown Lil, how to turn the cup upside down and turn it clockwise 3 times before reading the leaves. She remembers being taken to the women of the seances and the spiritualist church by her mum when poltergeist activity in her room got too much. They all agreed her troubles were because her gift was so strong. Sylv had a hard life too, and she and I were very close. She died just a few years ago, and before she got sick, she gave me one of her rings and a brooch that belonged to her beloved nanny Min. She never took to palmistry, but she was a great psychic. And in turn, her daughter never took to the tea leaves. Shelley preferred the tarot cards and the mediumship of the spiritualist. She still practices both to this day. She only had 2 children who lived, and one was a daughter. It was me.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much.
What energy!
Oh, it's a beautiful energy. What I would like to do is I'd like to invite the people who just listened to your story to just take a moment to feel in to the parts of the story that you just shared that snagged on their souls. You know, a piece that made you go, oh, you know, like a reciprocal story of something that you go, you were talking, and I was like, I had a laundress. My hero, my family hero was a laundress. It's like that, like bringing into the laundry, or the ring, the ring that is handed down to you. When you talked about people who maybe are sort of gifted, and perhaps they might have activity that goes on around them, and the gift that you described of women who come together and recognize that in each other, that will resonate so strongly in this community.
Yeah.
It
was the favorite thing I'd heard, because all the other stories about her, I half remembered, their stories that I've heard over the years. But this concept of, we know there's such a rich heritage of spiritual exploration, psychism, mediumship, and support through spirituality in this country. And there were women in those traditions, and some of them were writing, but they were rich women who had the leisure to pursue these things. Where is this unwritten, vibrant, working class, a community of women making the time in their lives to come together and do that? It's just happening in little homes around the country, and probably still is. And that really spoke to me, that they were creating community and being in healing service with their gift. In a way that, I feel like some of the stuff that I do now is, they wouldn't understand the forms of it, but it's kind of what they would if they were here today.
And a great teaching there, I think, as well, for I know a lot of us, we have the access to the internet. We can so easily go and we can look for ourselves in words. I need a name for what it is that I do before I'm allowed to do it, and actually, no. What if you had such a limited amount of time because you were out there supporting your family day in, day out, scrubbing your doorstep so that you could prove, that, like, all of those things that were required in your life, and then you had this thing that you were like, and yet in order to be me, I must do this thing. I don't care if it doesn't have a name. Form, or someone's not handed it down to me in a book or anything like that. It's part of us. It's part of me, and it's part of us. So powerful.
It really connected me in with it helped me make some peace with aspects of my ancestry, actually. It was really powerful. And like I say, I wrote that about a year ago, so it's not what I'm working on at the moment, but I do meditations with those grandmothers every day at the moment. So I
It's
am
beautiful.
working with the aftermath of that story. So and it speaks to that. Obviously it's a selected narrative that I've chosen there. There were lots of other things, but there is
Yeah.
something nice about stitching ourselves back into our own past and our own heritage, because then you
Yes.
can recognize some of the things, the burdens that were passed down, but also the gifts, and it helps kind of level that out in a way that's been really powerful for me.
Yeah, I love that. And you remind me that a lot of us want to research our family trees, and we go, oh, there's not much that's out there. There isn't much that's out there. And if you have somebody who is a living representative of that, go and speak to them now.
A living story. My mum said she didn't really know anything, and then she hours later was still talking, still sharing.
Yes, exactly. Is that bring curiosity, and it does come. It comes out and it flows. But I think the other thing for me is I've come to realize that sometimes those stories are lost.
Yeah.
But I believe that our ancestors would rather that we rewove them from the knowing that comes from our imaginative selves, which is where all of our stories come from eventually, than that we should just say, well, I can't access any of that and it's gone forever. We might not get it right. We might not get all the facts right. We might, but does that mean that we don't do it? Obviously, if you have access to the research or to a person, then use it, because that is treasure that you will miss once it's gone. But if you don't have it, you can open, rather than going, I'm researching my family, you can be, I'm in conversation with, just like I'm in conversation with my family.
And if you don't know who they are, right, because this is something that people will be saying, well, I'm adopted and I don't know who my family are, or oh, actually all of that was lost, or we were all displaced from where we came from. There's all kinds of reasons why there might be pain and wounding around just the very idea of seeking the story. But there were people in the group that I was in that were speaking to that, and they still showed up and told a story, but they said, I can't speak about the family because of various issues that mean I can't, but I can tell a fairy tale from the region that I know we came from.
Yes.
And they did that. And so even though they don't know the story of their great great grandmother, they do know a story that they're almost certain their great great grandmother would have heard.
And that's so beautiful, isn't it?
The way in. There's still a healing in that.
It is absolutely the way in. And as you were speaking, I was looking at my fingernails, and I was going, I remember when I was a little girl looking at my grandmother's fingernails, and they were very they were ridged, in a sort of like that sort of faceted way that you get with somebody who has washed clothes for a family for decades.
Yeah.
And she cared for her hands. So, she had her hand creams and her nail files, and she taught me all about like manicures and things like that. And I thought, that's a story in itself as well, isn't it? So I was sort of look at my fingernails and I think, I don't know much about her. I have very fragmented stories about her grandmother, tiny stories. And I think to myself, I wonder if I've got the same fingernails as her. There will be something, you look at that and you can go, my body, someone had the same knuckles as me. The same ears.
Yes. Yeah. And I see it in like as I get older, my face is becoming more like the female side, because I look more like my dad's side of the family. They've got, my mum and my nan, and all of those women all have these like dark eyes and a slightly darker skin tone than I have, whereas I look like the sort of Welsh side that's in my mum's side, and the Irish side from my dad's. Like I've got the very pale side of it, but I find that the mannerisms and the shape of my face is becoming more like them as I get older. It's like that sort of DNA story that's like written in there somewhere, isn't it? You can't, it just kind of comes out. And I have the little I have a little box where I keep those pieces of jewelry on my ancestral altar, and so I keep those. And that's been really nice to like lean into that sort of the physical anchor of it. And I started doing coffee ground readings, just a little bit for myself, just for lols. And it's actually been really fun. It's been a nice sort of, it just feels like, and of course they tell you how to, I bought a book about it and they told you to do a bunch of stuff. And I was like, nah, I'm just going to do the thing that I know that my great great nan told my great nan who told my mum. I'm just going to do that. And it's been working fine.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And there are so many different ways that we find things, isn't it? I remember my mum had a book called Everything Within. And I don't think she ever knew where it came from or who it belonged to, but it belonged to someone in her family. And I remember looking through it, and it's massive, and it's all about things that you can find out about, like the language of fans in there, and gardening through the age, everything. It's literally, it was called Everything Within, and it had it all in there. But I remember it had some like very basic reading spreads in there with playing cards, but playing cards, but you could still use them. And I just went through those. I just, and I was convinced that was why whoever it was had bought that book, for that reason, for that bit. I had no reason to believe that one way or the other. But it felt, it could well have been the gardening bit. But I love to think that even though my family were quite what's the word? They wanted to appear respectable on the outside, and they maybe got a little bit too pulled into that narrative and thought that's all they were, which they weren't. But so I never know about maybe some of their more fun bits. But that doesn't mean I can still, because I sort of think, well, that's alive in me and it came from somewhere. Believe you me, it came
doesn't
from
just spring out of the earth. Like, we'll probably will have these, I mean, far enough back, I mean, everyone's got some kind of witchy ancestor in there, and
yes,
it must have come from somewhere, and it could be heritage. I mean, I know for the Northern European stuff that you do, it's about kind of reconnecting in a lot of the time with our heritage, with these sort of stories from places where we've come from, or places that are resonant for us. And sometimes it will be that, like, through the bloodline, but we've all got so much mix of bloodline. Apart from you have like your family never left these
DNA in the universe. Honestly, I got so upset. I'm gonna have to say this now, because I got so upset because my cool ancestor, that my washerwoman ancestor, she did go over to Canada, and I was convinced, I was like, I'm gonna have Canadian ancestry, it's gonna be so exciting, everything like that. And I realized, no, she clearly just met someone from South Hampshire. And married them in Canada, and then came back with exactly the same genetic mix for her children as she started out with, which was deeply distressing for me. But I do believe, I think that I believe in the concept of the woven soul, that yes, there is blood heritage, but there is also land heritage, and there is language heritage. And for me, I probably work with or maybe like blood and land here, but language heritage is so important to me, and story heritage is so important to me. I'm going to share a little extract of some of a story, if I may. And this is that's very important to me, and I think this is why Angela Carter was my inspiration, was because what we have of the Norse and the Anglo-Saxon and the sort of Germanic myths and legends is such a fragment of what would have been. It was an oral tradition. It wasn't a written tradition. What we have that was written down largely by Christians who came along and were sort of, we'll record these already like dying, fading cultures. And it is a process of taking those story bones and breathing life back into them. And that's the work that I think I probably love the most around what I do. And bringing in those different perspectives. And I don't know, like maybe bringing in the spirit of inquiry and compassion to stories that can feel very dark and often violent and difficult in terms of what was related to us. And I think that is partially, our ancestors lived in different times to us. They
life was bloodier and harder.
It was harder, and we are there because of very, very difficult decisions that were made by people that wanted to survive. And that's part of what we need to do. I also do believe that these stories are an opportunity for us to recognize that sometimes our traumas and our wounds are not about being victims, they are about being perpetrators.
Oh yeah,
that is actually an incredibly important part of healing story. And so these stories do have a lot of challenge in them. And the story that I am working with at the moment through Winter Nights is the story of the god Hermod, who is considered to be, he's sometimes said to be Odin's son, but he's also thought to be perhaps a human who was a shaman. And he goes down into the underworld. He is the only one brave enough to say to Balder and to say to Frigg and Odin when their son Balder has been slain, I will go down and I will speak to Hela and I will ask her to give Balder back to you. You know? So I think he was a human being doing this when like Thor himself was like, no, thanks, I'll pass on that one. Thank you so much. What sort of person was he? But as I was doing the stories, and there are 4 of them, as he takes the descent into the underworld, Angra Balder, who is the lover. Oh, she's so good. She's the lover of Loki, the mother of Fenris and Hela, who obviously we're going to meet later on, and Jormungand, the world serpent. And she was just like, he's coming to see me. And I was like, okay, then. And so this is her story. It's the mother of monsters. And in this part of the story, she's just starting to share her story with Hermod. And yeah, she's just starting to open up to him, but she's still not entirely sure about him, if we're honest. So this is what she says. She says, you seem unusually trustworthy for a member of the Aesir. Or perhaps you are unusually silent. I've always appreciated silence. Here is a truth I recognized in my own heart long before the unbreakable promises had been forged. Like Frigg, the bargain I struck with the Aesir forged a road that favored the child I understood the least and therefore feared for the most. Love, I learned too late, is not the same as understanding. Seeking to understand is like standing on the edge of the ocean and catching a few meager drops of water in a crystal vial. You can taste it, you can smell it, you can examine it, but it will never be the vastness of the ocean. It will never offer more than a fragment of the true nature of love. Love ebbs and flows, rides the air and descends again and again down into the pools of darkness. Even when I hold my babes to my chest, even when I experienced what it is to know every breath of beingness as a miracle, the green coils of Jormungand snaking over the furs that lined our nest. The soft pelt of Fenris and his overlarge paws, and the fragile life and death shape of my impossible Hela. Even then, I was just wading out into the shallows, treading water through pools I knew myself as a child. I was still just floating out on the very fringes of the creature we call love. In my most lucid moments, I see love as a reflection of all that is, a soft moon glow shining in response to the solar light of the world tree. Sometimes, more lucid still, I think that we are the shadow of love, an outward projection of love's inner journey to know itself. But my sight cannot travel far enough to truly know. My daughter knows, but she does not tell. She says that each of us must take our own journey into death for ourselves to understand the mysteries of the beyond. My time will come, and I can wait. Perhaps her silence on this matter is why the All-Father cast her down to reign over Helheim in the first place. Like me, he is not willing to make the journey, but unlike me, his journey is already foretold, and a story beyond his lifetime is already sown within the fertile soil of the future. Yeah. There is
it has that sort of sweeping primal feeling that I think that Angra Boda always has, because it speaks to bits of earth and sea and kind of all of that kind of drawing on nature as as a kind of, she's got that vastness about her when you encounter her in ritual
Yes.
ways, has been my experience. I was really struck by the gentleness and the softness of the language she used to describe Fenris, the softness of Fenris and the fragility of Hela. It's very interesting.
Yes. And I think this is what I found so fascinating about this story, because she didn't need to share that part, but she chose to share this very, very tender, almost like womb-like, nest-like experience of what she felt as a mother, which I think that people, human beings who hold tiny babies feel that primal response of protection. And it was like she wanted us to understand that these like monstrous beings, as they become, and her name means like bringer of grief.
Yes.
And she said, well, you can't grieve unless you've loved. So she wanted to share that, and I found that very interesting, because she doesn't normally, as she would normally be quite like, come into my realm.
Yes.
You think.
Yes.
And there is more of that in the story, but she just said, yeah, share this bit, because that's the bit that was the unexpected bit for me.
And, but as mother of monsters, we can then cast our eye onto it as humans and go, oh no, monsters. But she's the mother of them. And so for her, it's not that. She's beyond human ideas. And it's nice to throw bits like that into the story to remind us not to read it that way. And it speaks to that lead into, as you say, a lot of the sagas that we have, where we take a lot of the Northern European stories from, were written by later people who were with their own lens and their own. It's good for us to try and disrupt the lens through which we view the story. I think there's a lot of healing from that.
I think so, and to remember that the people who were writing about those cultures were writing from a perspective of a culture that believed itself to be better than.
Yes.
And that was in its infancy still, so still had quite a lot to prove for itself. So I do feel that there's a recovery process, but also that the Northern tradition gods and beings like Angrboda, who would definitely not say she's a god, she'd be like, no, thank you very much.
I'm a force that was always here, older than the gods, better than
exactly.
the gods.
I'm a primal force. Are there to offer us a narrative about like divinity, or about spirit that isn't, this is perfect and you are not?
And that's what the big old myths want to do. They're complicated and messy, and there's no like easy good guy, bad guy, tied up stories, like nice and neat. Let's sit in we need the vastness inside those characters, particularly when we're talking about archetypes and gods and spirit beings, because they're trying to speak to quite vast concepts, which I think is why when I start doing Story of the Month next year, I am going to start with Moon Palace. And it's a story that the way everybody at the end of the story always goes, that can't be how the story finishes. First of all, I don't know what that means. Second of all, that's not an end. You've answered me nothing. What the hell?
Yes.
We've got a desire to tell stories in new ways, and some of it is powerful, like the retelling of myths from the supporting characters. And anybody that's ever studied to be a writer, we all do that. We go, you write the background stories, little scenes of the side characters, so you can flesh them out and know them and love them enough to put them in their small roles. And it doesn't make it into the main story, but it exists life into the characters. So anyone who's done any kind of training as a more traditional writer will know that kind of coming in from different places in the story is important. But sanitizing it, tidying it up, making it more palatable and more, do we want to be connecting with a deity force that is known as the mother of monsters? There's too much in our society that would turn away from it and go, oh no, I only want ascension, please. No. There's no, that's not the story. That's not the story. And the stories are being told in like little soundbite ways now that is Instagrammable, and that go on to fit onto a reel or whatever, as we were saying before. And sometimes we're losing the magic of a story, but sometimes we can distort a story so much that I think that we can do harm, not just to the story, but by the story. Do you remember years ago when people were sharing a little thing? It's going to sound like nothing. I'm going to explain why I get a bee in my bonnet about it. People were posting this thing that said at Easter, that said Happy Ishtar. Ishtar was originally the name for Easter. It's the name where Easter, it's the word that Easter comes from. And, you know, bunnies and eggs were sacred to her. So let's reclaim the goddess, Happy Ishtar. And I read it and everything in my body went, wah! But then I was like, no, don't entirely freak out because you don't know a lot about Babylonian and Sumerian mythology. It's not.
It's very big of you, I'm going to say, very big of you in that moment.
It's like, this sounds 100% like just bullshit, but I keep seeing it everywhere. I'm going to speak to someone who does know about these things. And I said, is there something I'm unaware of about bunnies and eggs? And she was like, do not get me started about this. Of course, there's not a thing that you don't know. Of course, it's not true. Of course, it's nonsense. And but it spoke to, I think, people who were sharing that. It was speaking to a desire for a story that they could feel included in, where we could reclaim, like, oh, actually, this isn't, you know, for people who have maybe been wounded by a Christian heritage, which, you know, I wasn't raised in that kind of faith, but I know a lot of people who you know, were wounded by being raised inside narrow interpretations of Christianity that didn't allow them to be who they were. So maybe this is an opportunity to reclaim some power. It's not power because it's nonsense, because it was a lie. And it bothered me a lot. And for a few years, it kept doing the rounds on social media. Happy Ishtar, Happy Ishtar. And every time I'd get like, oh, this is really, and I was posting, please don't repost this. Don't repost stuff without figuring out what it is. Because then we're using a pretend story to create, you know, a sense of community, a sense of belonging, a sense of knowledge, speaking to a feeling of being understood and being, you know, and knowing something maybe that other people don't know. So you're speaking to your own specialness and stuff, which is also very alluring. But it wasn't that. And I knew it wasn't that. I was like, it really, really made me angry in a way that I was like, am I being disproportionate? Anyway, you know how I'm a bit obsessive sometimes?
Sometimes.
I designed into have a hunt for the first recorded mention of Ishtar as being this thing, right? Because I was like, where has this come from? I must know. And I think what I found, and I'm not a scholar on this, so I am open to being corrected if I'm wrong about this. I haven't been able to find anything older than this, but it went back quite a few years before that, but certainly not like pre-internet stuff. You're talking about like recent years, where there was stories being told by a quite extremist right-wing Christian group, and it was a conspiracy theory website in the early days of such things, where it was speaking to a cult of people inside government who are drinking the blood of babies and virgins, all that stuff, to maintain power. It's like a new world order thing, and it's this form of like American right-wing Christianity that says don't give your children Easter eggs because it's actually like evil paganism making its way in. And so they said, you know, Easter, celebrating Easter like this, like these pretend Christians, is actually, it's bringing forth the whore of Babylon. You're actually, these are Satanists and they used to worship Ishtar. That's where the word Easter comes from. It's the earliest reference I could see to it.
Wow.
The lie told with malevolent intent to speak of gods that were not their own, to push a message that is inherently harmful and malevolent as well. And it made me wonder if my response to this tiny little snippet of story that purported to be showing you the way into a bigger story, it didn't just annoy me because it was wrong. I feel like because they hadn't bothered to honor the story and see, you only have to Google for 2 minutes to figure out whether that's Ishtar or not, for goodness sake. But were they unknowingly sharing the seed of a malevolent story, a malignant story, living inside that lie, which was, and that's why I responded so, you know, strongly every time I saw it. Unfortunately, that silly little meme seems to have died a death now. I haven't seen it for years, so it didn't seem to catch on, thank goodness, because it was really driving me mad. But sometimes story is used to to lie, to create.
Yes.
It happens in politics all the time. It happens in corporations all the time. It happens in courtrooms all the time. You know, we're using stories to manipulate because we respond to stories, so it can draw us in deliberately, I think. And there was I think, a possibility to, if you don't know the story that you're telling, if you don't take time to honor it, perhaps you're spreading a different story than you think you are. I don't know why that just popped up in my mind, but it did.
Isn't it? You know, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? And there is something there for me around like how legends, how myths, how customs are born. There is a moment, isn't there, when they are born, and that doesn't. We can often be like, well, oh, I want it to be old and ancient because then it will, I'll feel validated, in some way.
Wicca goes back to the Stone Age. No, 1950s. Yeah,
2 Wiccans were allowed to say it's fine. Yeah. But there is a desire, isn't there? There's a desire for connection, which we've talked about all the way through. This desire for ancestral connection, and to have like validation, and to be part of a story, you know, which has to be then counterbalanced against, I get to create my own story and acknowledge that and research it as much or as little as I want to. And yeah, I really want to feel into what you said, that point that you made about, we both know that there are like modern deities now. There are modern deities that have, people who follow them and for whom that experience is powerful and edifying and beautiful. And that perhaps those deities will go on to lead extraordinary lives for centuries to come. Look at your face.
I know. I have opinions.
They do. They are there. And at some point, whether you think that those deities were born or whether they were born into our consciousness as human beings, that happened. You know, for all of the deities that we work with today, there was a point at which they revealed themselves to a human being. That happened. You know, and you could argue backwards and forwards, you know, one way or the other, and we'll never know because we make the stories out of it, don't we? But there is a point which I know I feel very, very strongly about in the Northern tradition around that piece of research to say, I can take a story and I can know that there are parts of it that are dark and difficult. And if I am unwilling to work with them, then I shouldn't be working with it at all.
Yes. And also parts that you don't know. I mean, my problem with some of the modern deities that are being made up now and then packaged commercially so that people, you know, I've worked with, we'll talk about the Norns in a little bit because we both are so deeply in love with them. And I did a year of devotion to Vathandi, about whom very, very little is written down. She's a really tough deity to get a fix on. I really feel like education is such an important part of spiritual work. I really, you know, you can't just be like, oh, that was my intuitive thing. That's important, but you don't know whether you're bullshitting yourself, which is entirely possible for all of us. We're all working with our ego and what we want to hear and all of those things. Everyone is working with that. We all have to be able to check ourselves. Having knowledge is a really good way for us to go, oh, actually, it doesn't make any sense at all. Maybe Vathandi didn't come and tell me that because, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's ground it in a bit of knowledge and education, and these old stories are great for that. I did a year of devotion with her, and she showed me an image of herself multiple times, and I always see her like this now, where she has antlers, right? There is no reference to that anywhere, and I didn't speak about it. I don't speak about it much at all. And I remember our mutual beloved friend Laura Dallaghan, who's an amazing visionary artist, spiritual artist, asked me if I would pose for a picture of Vathandi so that she could channel the goddess energy, but I would, you know, wear the stuff and be the, you know, the muse. And I was like, oh yeah, but do you mind if I wear some antlers? Because obviously Laura's got antlers.
Of course she does. Multiple. Of course
she does. And she was like, really? I said, I'm not saying, it's just my own personal thing that I saw. And then since then, we've both seen other artists publish imagery of Mathandi specifically with these antlers. We went to a ritual and they were antlers, and we were like, that is really weird. But having us, maybe there's something in a story that has been lost. Maybe there's a reason why she's showing herself. These are all people, artists who don't know each other, right? So it's not something that we've discussed with each other. These are people I don't know who've had this thing, which makes me think there are things that really we should trust our intuition with it. Where I find it challenging, and this I think is where we can decide how we feel about modern deities, is when people declare, I know the thing. I did a vision and I know the true version of the thing. Please allow me to teach you the true version of the thing, rather than just saying, you know what, I had a moment of personal gnosis here that I can share in a safe space, but it's not I'm not the prophet. Do you know what I mean? There's a bit too much setting yourself up in the role of prophet with the new deities, and I find that I find problematic. And I also find spurious connections that don't make sense to me. But you know, it's my own neurosis. I don't.
It's not. I had a really, very similar conversation with Sarita Desday on an interview I did with her at some point, and it was fascinating. And we should come back, and people must let me know, because there's a whole other topic around collective story that we haven't really discussed, but that is important to know that. And there is a point, I think, where a deity might reveal themselves to a person for a healing purpose, or for a purpose of, you know, a personal gnosis, an experience of personal gnosis.
Yeah.
They might also reveal themselves as a way of offering another aspect of themselves into the collective, which might have existed in the past, or might be something that is relevant and important for their message to the world at the present moment. And the only way we can really know that is not to say, I was shown this, therefore it must be true. And Vathandri also has a cat's tail. No, not time, you know, whatever it is. She does not have a cat's tail. Just really doesn't. But we can do it through researching the past and what we know about that, and we can also do it by offering, as you say, in safe spaces, what we have received ourselves, and seeing whether they're verified by others.
Yeah, and also just being really honest about what you've seen. I did a guest teaching thing at Sarita Destey's meeting in the circle space about healing with Hecate. And there's so much in the old mythology that really supports it and lets it make sense. Even the type of healing that I do is so relevant to a lot of Hecatean stuff. But there's so much of it that's just been my personal experience with her. And I think as long as we're honest about saying, you know, rather than saying, oh, I've revealed the true secret gods of this land, instead of saying that and then writing a book and selling an expensive course about it, if we just say, this is my experience, and but this is the history, and why don't you have your experience? I think that's where we can really tell. There's so got to be. I'm always very suspicious of people who fully know and fully understand any of the gods. And going back to that Anglo-Boda thing that story that you were saying about love and understanding not existing in the same place, that brings us back to what I think, when I know, you know, I talked about the story, the more immediate story, the stories of our ancestors, and then we've expanded that out, the stories of our land and the stories of ourselves on our healing journeys. There's so many ways that we can, stories like such a multi-layered, ever-growing, like big Russian doll of a topic. But in the really big stories, in the big myths and the spiritual traditions from all kinds of different lands, we must be able to allow ourselves to sit in the uncomfortable parts of the story, but also in the uncomfortable, the discomfort of not fully understanding the story, and maybe that would unfold later. And that was really that sort of energy of vastness from Anglo-Boda, and what you were reading earlier really speaks to that for me, to being able to sit and just discover that and go, well, maybe this is the work of more than one lifetime. Maybe I'm never going to understand the wholeness of this story. That's part of allowing ourselves to sit in and part of and be healed by story, is to not have to know all the answers, to not pretend to, and knowing that we don't have. That kills story dead, and I think it kills healing dead. And we need courage to do it and act as though we know everything all the time. There's a real power in saying, no, I'm just sitting in this story, just I'm a tiny part of it. I'm trying to see, I'm trying to grow bigger.
It's the same, I think, as channeling story. And again, another topic, a topic for another time. When you channel story from deity or from a land or from a rune or whatever it is, there is a point at which you recognize, well, I'm an interface for that message to come through. So there is going to be a colouring of the story because it's coming through me.
Because I'm the instrument and I will flavour what comes
I'm
out.
the instrument, exactly. There's very, very, some, I know some very skilled priestesses and things can bring forth words that they've never heard before and like offer them, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. I think that probably the deities who choose me know that they're going to have to work with the word horde that is inside me, and that's pretty much it. But
but I've seen your body. I've seen your face and your body change as you do healing work. So there is,
yes,
you're bringing
face
forth
changes, body
in
changes,
that way. Yeah.
voice changes, those. So we can get out of the way, can't we?
Yeah.
And I know that for a lot of people have said with the stories that I offer from within the northern tradition specifically, there is so much in there that I don't understand. Yeah. That's like, because they're vast concepts.
Yeah.
And even like a tiny, like just a few of the sentences offer something that is incomplete.
Yes.
Like a loop that you could go into and follow and spiral down into that isn't completed in the story, it's completed later on. But I'm going to be quiet now because there's a whole extra bit. What I wanted to finish with was saying that yes, indeed, we are working with the Nornir. I remember right from the beginning when you said about you told us the story of the red bead when we were in Iceland.
Oh, yeah.
I was remembering going to the Blue Lagoon, and it was me and you and another lovely lady who does a lot of work with the Nornir, and we did a ritual to the Nornir
in the Blue Lagoon.
And of course we did. And
we weren't surrounded by families, by the way. We found a little quiet place in the water by ourselves. But yes,
we did. But we did have runes in mud on our faces. There were things like that going on. That did happen. But they've often popped up. I think, when we founded our business, when we were doing shamanic work in our business, they were the ones who were like, right, now you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to work on this way, and you're going to learn this methodology, which was not one that either of us had been taught, and yet we learned how to do it. So they've always been a feature for us, which is why I'm so excited that the first in-person event that I have run in years, because I've done so much on Zoom now, is going to be with you and the wonderful Laura Dallaghan working with the Nornir. And I would love it if you would tell people more about it so that they can come and they know that it's coming. We haven't quite got the booking page up yet, but it will be coming, people. So watch
it will be coming. It's absolutely, I promise. We've booked the venue. We've had our meetings. We've spoken to the gods. They're on board. The Nords are on board and they have promised us they will show up on this day. So Laura and I here in Glastonbury run an event called the Healing Song Circle, where people, I think, show up expecting to learn some words and do some singing. And we're like, no, embrace the not knowing of what the song is going to be. It's very much like our views on story. So it's intuitive singing, which Laura and I do together a lot. You and I have done together for years for various different purposes, healing, magic, seership, all just years of experimentation that we've done. And then of course you've done so much for rune singing and I've done so much for shamanic healing and stuff. So it's really just decades of work kind of led us all into these strange things that we're now doing. And the Healing Song Circle is something we do here every Sabbath, so every equinox, solstice, and the fire festivals in between, where we bring people together in honor of the season usually, and we allow the group to come together, which is never the same configuration twice. We never know what the song is going to be, and we build songs to create healing, shift energy. They are works of great magic, and they've really, really, really been powerful. And instead of doing our standard 2-hour evening ceremony for Imbolc, we will be doing one for solstice. For anybody who's local, we will be doing one in Glastonbury for solstice. But for Imbolc, we've decided to have a very special event with you as our first guest teacher, and we've been doing these since Lammas last year. And they've got quite a following. The people have responded. People show up going, don't really know what this is. And we're like, we can't really explain it. Let's just do it. It's been a real openness to sitting in the unknown there. But we've decided to do this big in-person event, the three of us, and it's going to be much bigger. It's on Saturday, the 3rd of February.
3rd of February, yeah.
We are doing it in 2 parts. The afternoon is going to be a workshop where we use different techniques from each of us to let people connect with the Norns, but really connecting with their own magic. That's what we're doing. So you will be leading people through the wild voice work so that people can give voice to the magic they want to create. Then Laura will be leading people to like take that magic we've given voice to and painting it into the stones, creating stones that people can hold, and so that it kind of has physicality, like the vision is grounded in an anchor. And then I'm going to be taking that vision and working with the threads, and we're going to be singing into threads ready to weave something new. So it's going to be a really interesting, really powerful 3-hour afternoon workshop, quite an intensive with the three of us. And you know, obviously we're all teachers, we're all priestesses, we're all healers, we've all got, you know, over 25 years of experience of magical work each. You know, there's a lot of there's going to be a lot of energy and between the three of us, a lot of expertise in the room for people who want to come and really change something, because the Norns are the weavers of weird. I'm sure all of your Hearth Space community know who they are, the weavers of weird, and they can help us, you know, understand the patterns of where we've come from, and to weave our new story going forward a little bit differently. We can prevail upon them for that if it comes from a true place, and a place that's in alignment with our overall fate. And that's what we're working with, to really drop people down into those. And then in the evening, everyone will come back after a break. We will lead some shamanic journeying, just as Laura and I always do in our circle. And the three of us will sing the Norns for people, which Laura and I never do. We're always in the group, but the three of us coming together to sing the Norns and bring that kind of, I think, going to bring through oracle, but you know, it depends what the gods want to do, really. There's always that. But we will be singing for the group, and then we'll be leading that group to sing all of the magic, all of their vision, all their dreams that they've brought in, and all of the healing that's come through, to sing that as a group and build a song to energize that. And that's what we're doing in Glastonbury on the 3rd of February, which is obviously around the time of Imbolc, first stirrings of life coming to the surface. Really powerful time to be working with the Norns.
It is going to be epic. I'm very excited about it.
Yes, and we're in the process of sharing it with everyone. We've been doing the internal work with the gods first. So that's the way these things go, and we will be sharing it with you guys. But it's a very intensive, very unique day. It's going to be really powerful, and we will be taking bookings for that soonish.
Yes, indeed, which will be great. I'm really looking forward to it, and we will get that up to people as soon as we possibly can. Join, and yes, Kay Gillard, we have spoken for substantively longer than we had planned to, which I hope has been enjoyable for people. So for those of you who have stuck the course, who joined us at the beginning, and you are with us until the end, we salute you.
Yeah, we do.
To Healing Story. For those of you who have dropped into different spaces, welcome. And you know, I'm going to get the recording out, so it'll be out on the YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing it as well, so that you can dip in and out. And yeah, let us know which stories have offered healing to you. Why has that been the case? What are your experiences of the difference between individual story, individual sharing, individual offerings of wisdom, and collective story, collective knowing? You know, we would love to hear from you on that, as well as anything that you would like me to bring Kay back for from the topics we've just discussed today, because this is probably, I think this is the first time we've discussed story work in this one. It's a very, you know, it's a deep topic. There is a lot there.
And the Norns, of course, are so present, aren't they, with all the different threads. Don't forget this bit. What about this bit? What about this? And that story, it's little and it's big. It's all of those things, and it can be fiction and true at the same time. There's so much in it to talk about. It's been really nice to be in a space where we can talk, where we can skip across all these different parts of the tapestry, because you can't do that with everyone. So thanks for providing so much space for us to talk about it, and I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's been my absolute pleasure, and thank you to everyone who has either watched or will be watching. And yeah, just let us know how it's landed with you. And I could see that Siri's like waving, so hello. Lovely to see you. We're going to finish now, but we look forward to seeing you all very, very soon, and to seeing what your responses are to our interview. So bye everybody.
Bye, love.